Hi, everyone.
Hello again. We are on page 84 of the Proclaimer's book, and here's the subhead, Tanning the Old Lady's Hide. I wonder what that could be about.
Okay. In the 1930s, the message these zealous witnesses proclaimed included a stinging expose of false religion. A helpful tool in this regard was released at the General Convention of Jehovah's Witnesses, September 15 to the 15th to the 20th, 1937, in Columbus, Ohio. On Saturday, September 18, following his morning discourse, Brother Rutherford released the tan-colored book, Enemies. It denounced false religion as a great enemy, always working injury to mankind. False religionists were identified as agents of the devil, whether they are aware of that fact or not. When presenting the book to the audience, Brother Rutherford said, "You will notice that its cover is tan, and we will tan the old lady's hide with it." To this the audience gave loud and enthusiastic approval. And they did have a footnote which said, a reference to the great harlot mentioned in Revelation chapter 17. The book Enemies stated, all organizations on the earth that are in opposition to God and his kingdom take the name of Babylon and harlot, and those names specifically apply to the leading religious organization, the Roman Catholic Church. Years later, it was seen that the harlot actually represents the world empire of all false religion.
For some years, the phonograph had played a part in tanning the old lady. But in connection with the phonograph work, there was a surprise at the 1937 convention. At this assembly, the work using the portable phonograph on the doorstep was introduced, recalls Elwood Lundstrom, who was just 12 years old at the time. Formerly, we had been carrying the phonograph with us in the service, but we had only played it when invited inside. An organization of special pioneers was outlined at the Columbus Convention to spearhead the use of the doorstep setup with the phonograph and the follow-up work with interested persons, first then called back calls, and Bible studies with an arrangement called model study. Jehovah's people left that convention well equipped for the work of proclaiming God's kingdom. They certainly needed all the encouragement they could get. The rising tide of nationalism in the 1930s brought opposition, in some cases mob violence, from individuals who were determined to stop Jehovah's Witnesses from meeting together and from preaching. So who's the old lady that you're trying to tan the hide of?
Christendom, basically.
And well, they actually admit here that they've changed their doctrine. So this thing they're using, this Enemies book, which we have a copy of here.
Yeah, I'll just show you what it looks like. You can see the tan color. And look at the illustration here. You can see it's a shield and a sword and a helmet. And there is print there, which is Ephesians 6, verses 16 and 17.
So that's the passage where we have the sword of the Spirit, God's Word, etc. Where Paul is using the illustration of a Roman soldier's equipment to make the point that we are in spiritual warfare with the world. Mm-hmm. But when Paul is out preaching the good news, not the good news of the kingdom, by the way, as they boast about here, when he's out preaching the good news, for instance, in Athens, does he use the word of God violently? Does he even imply that you are my enemies, you people I am preaching to? And that's the thing that they take pride in here, is that what they call this book and their general work in that period, a stinging expose of false religion.
This is what they're proclaiming, it said. Part of what they're proclaiming is about false religion, denouncing false religion, and calling people, saying false religionists were identified in this book as agents of the devil. I just got such an uncomfortable feeling when I was reading this, thinking, yeah, they have created a tool which divides you from everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
Divides you from the people you're talking to. You don't have a feeling they're misled. I mean, I believe Jehovah's Witnesses are misled, but I don't view them as my enemy.
No.
And I don't denounce them when I meet them. I think there should be gentleness and respect when you're talking, and giving the person the benefit of the doubt and persuading them, not hammering them over the head.
Yeah, this, I think, was a deliberate method of Rutherford to separate the witnesses from everybody else. If you regard them as enemies,
Yeah,
which he plainly does, and the title is one word, enemies,
yeah.
as
Put
was
you in
his pattern.
fighting mode.
And the idea that the gospel of the kingdom involves stinging exposés, well, again, go through all of their speeches and acts and see if Peter or Paul or anybody else
Yeah,
is doing stinging exposés, except where, for instance, in the Sanhedrin, something comes up that's already controversial. But in the public work, they're not attacking religion.
mm-hmm.
They're not attacking even what was markedly false religion. The pagan world,
Yeah.
Paul is at his most gentle when he's talking to pagans.
So I think, though, this method will work for what their purposes, because what happens is you're not going to listen to people. You're going to talk at them.
Yeah.
You're not going to give them the benefit of the doubt and listen and ask questions, and you're in a mode of, I'm here to tell you, and I'm here to almost accuse you
Not
of
conducive.
being in the wrong.
Not
place.
conducive to effective dialogue with anybody, let
Yeah.
alone people who don't know you. And
Yeah.
their first impression they get is your tone at the door and the things you're carrying.
Yeah,
And I'm thinking of this text. This is 1 Peter 3, where, now it is true, we've said emphatically before, there are no texts in the New Testament, either in Paul or elsewhere, that command us to preach. But we do have a command to defend. That is, we're not in the driver's seat. We're not going to their door. They're asking us questions. And here it is. This is 1 Peter 3:13. Now, who is there to harm you if you are zealous for what is good? But even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you will be blessed. Have no fear of them, nor be troubled. But in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect. I don't see any gentleness or respect in this approach.
no.
And Peter here is obviously, he's been the first preacher of the church since Pentecost, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he's saying, this is what you do. You, first of all, you're not in the aggressor seat, you're in the passive seat. And if our conduct is good enough, he says in verse 13, people will start to ask us why we are the way we are.
We believe, yeah.
But this approach of, and I think it's all based on a fallacy, the fallacy of false religion.
Yeah.
So if you set yourself up as the true religion, the pure worshippers, and everybody else as the devil's organization,
Yeah.
then you're setting up a dynamic that just doesn't work for effective dialogue.
When we were looking at this and preparing, we were talking about the fact that this book is exactly, 20 years after the finished mystery.
Yeah.
So even this new book is different than the previous book in some of the things it's saying. So wouldn't that be called false teachings, even by themselves? I think a lot of times both of them are false. But if they call something that they taught false, well, does that make them false religion?
And interestingly, in the footnote you read, they admit that their
changed.
teaching at the time about what Babylon was wrong.
Yeah,
They
it's
don't
not,
say wrong, they just say, well, years later it was seen that the harlot actually represents the world empire. But what did they say it was then?
it was everything.
All
It was
organizations on the earth
governments,
that are in opposition to God and his kingdom.
Yeah.
So Babylon, and then they zero in on the Roman Catholic Church as being somehow
Yeah.
more guilty than everybody else. But everybody's guilty
Yeah.
of being false religionists and being on the devil's side.
So how many wrongs or how many false things do you have to have for you to be classed as a false religion?
It's never directly answered, is it? In the
No,
Watchtower
but I
literature.
think in truth, you could look at any religion and find things that are false.
Yeah.
You know that because people are human, and yeah, they're going to. There's going to be a mixed bag. There's going to be good and there's going to be bad. Now that doesn't justify the false things or the bad things, but it also doesn't justify casting off others and saying you're the good, because there's going to be good and bad in you too.
Well, that's the irony of them doing this 20 years after the finished mystery, the scandal of the finished mystery, where you predicted Christendom and Babylon would be fallen before 1920. You set dates for that.
Yeah.
You lived with that embarrassment, and now you're back again, attacking the people who were right. They were right in 1917, and you were wrong.
Yeah.
Because they said, no, we're not at the end yet. You
you
were
called
dogmatic about it.
And you called it persecution when they disagreed with you, when they wouldn't go along with you. We wouldn't accept what you were teaching. They said it was wrong. Then you accused them.
As you're going to prove in your link.
Yeah.
We've been through this before.
Yeah.
And there's a thing to say first, though, which is that the truth is there is no true and false religion. There's only God's people and people who aren't God's people.
Yeah.
And even God's people will have falsehoods and sometimes be preaching falsehoods and living in a way that is certainly not godly, but they'll still be God's people. Mm-hmm. And you see the fallacy of false religion just looking at Israel's history in the Old Testament.
That's right.
You see that they are God's people from Abraham's time onward, but there's always something wrong, and sometimes a lot of things wrong, with the generation that is alive on earth.
I mean, the Watchtower views Israel as having been God's organization, and that being switched over to the Christian church, or to them at some point in time. But while Israel was God's organization, wasn't there things that were bad and good in it?
That's right.
And we don't just cast it off, because we recognize where humans are that's going to be true.
And when the church is set up on earth, and you think of it, if you're a witness, that replaced literal Israel with spiritual Israel.
Were they any better?
Did Christ say they would be any better than Israel? Well, he says the kingdom of heaven is like unto a sower who goes out to sow, and we know the results of that sowing were not all blessing.
It's not 100% for everyone that even accepts the message.
So then if that's true of even those who do accept it gladly, how much more it's going to be true when the devil goes to work in the second parable and puts all those seeds in your field, and God allows that to happen. So all we can expect for the whole age of the church is wheat and weeds growing together. Mm-hmm. That apparently Rutherford has ruled out. All the wheat are now in my barn. Yeah. So the kingdom of heaven parables, I think, in Matthew 13, do not predict anything like Jehovah's Witnesses' view of the last days. Yeah. They say that
dragnet one.
The dragnet one is the same.
Yeah.
It can only be seen who is righteous and who is right at the very, very end.
Yeah. And the dividing is by the angels.
Yeah.
Not you.
Yeah.
So the link is Divine Purpose, that book, slams clergy for rejecting Russell's daft date setting. That was the name of our video. But if you watch that video, at the end of it, watch the follow-up one, which is called God Rejects Clergy for Their Refusal to Accept Russell's 1874 to 76? Inner chamber parousia.
I thought it was ridiculous when you read it to me, because I do remember reading it when I was a witness. So God is testing clergy of Christendom and Christendom in general by a false set of dates that Russell was preaching publicly.
I mean, this book, the Divine Purpose book, is in the 50s, isn't it?
Yeah.
And they are giving their history, another history, and they start criticizing Christendom for something that they don't even believe, and which has proved to be wrong. But boy, they're terrible. They rejected Russell.
And they say the
I
same,
don't
of
know
course,
what
about.
sense that makes.
They said the same about the Finnish mystery. That
Yeah.
when that was rejected, somehow that was a test of Christendom.
Yeah.
And then others saying it about the rejection. They said that they were being persecuted for this. The rising tide of nationalism in the 1930s brought opposition, in some cases mob violence. We asked the question again, why was there mob violence in the United States against Jehovah's Witnesses? They bring up the phonograph, they've already brought up the sound car, and they tell you about the tone of the message.
Yeah.
So no one is surprised if you just do a little bit of
Yeah.
thinking about this history, why they were persecuted.
If you went around knocking on all your neighbors' doors and telling them they were bad neighbors, like just what reaction do you suppose you'd get?
You are agents of the devil.
Okay.
See you next time.